Welcome back to Occult Archives, listeners. You know, the place where we kind of dig into the hidden history behind those books that have always given people the chills.
The books that make you shiver when you see them on a dusty shelf, or even just their titles in a catalog.
Exactly. Like those grimoires filled with symbols and rituals, or those ancient texts that seem to hold forbidden knowledge. The books that folks have both worshipped and, well, totally freaked out about.
And for our 100th deep dive, we've got a real doozy, folks. A classic.
This one is a biggie.
We're diving into the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus.
Oh yeah, that one. So think about it. A mysterious tablet, maybe made of emerald, possibly green granite, could even be green jasper, depending on how you interpret the ancient terms. And it's said to be inscribed with these, well, like fundamental truths about the whole universe.
Heavy stuff.
Our mission, to guide you, our awesome listeners, through the history and translations of this incredibly influential alchemical text. We'll try to extract those core insights without bogging you down with too many
technicalities.
Too many technicalities, yeah. We want those aha moments, not information overload.
Exactly. And speaking of origins, where on earth did this thing even come from? It pops up seemingly out of nowhere in the West around the 12th century, nestled within editions of this book called the Secretum Secretorum.
Secretum Secretorum. Okay, that sounds mysterious already.
Right. It was actually a translation of an Arabic work, the Kitab Sirr al-Lasar, which is basically like a guidebook for kings. It was making the rounds in Europe as this, ancient wisdom text.
Ancient advice for rulers. Sounds kind of relevant even now, in a way.
Always relevant. But to answer your question about its origins, think Johannes Hispalensis around 1140, Philip of Tripoli in 1243. They were translating this collection into Latin, and there are even whispers about even earlier translations.
So it appears in this guide for rulers in the 12th century. But how old is the Kitab Sirr al-Aus itself?
Well, that's where the trail gets a bit fuzzy. Scholars estimate it could date back to around 800 AD, but there's no clear date for when the Emerald Tablet was added to that particular work.
So it could have been incorporated later on. Okay, that makes sense. Now, you mentioned other early Arabic versions of the tablet, right? So it wasn't just suddenly, poof, they're in the 12th century.
Exactly. The scholar Homeyard found another early Arabic version in a work attributed to get this Jabir.
Jabir, as in Jabir ibn Hayyan, the famous alchemist.
The very same. It was specifically in the Kitab Ustukus al-Us al-Thani. In English, that's the second book of the Elements of Foundation. And later on, Ruska found another 12th century version attributed to Sergius of Nablus. But here's the kicker. Ruska also discovered a version appended to, well, it's a bit of a mouthful, the Kitab Sirr al-Khaliqa wa Sanat al-Tabiya. It's also known as the Kitab Balinas al-Hakim fil Ilal, the book of Balinas, the wise on the causes.
Balinas. Now, that's a name that carries some weight. Wasn't he linked to Apollonius of Tyana?
Yeah,
like the legendary philosopher and miracle worker?
Oh, absolutely. Balinas is often identified with Apollonius of Tyana, that Neo-Pythagorean philosopher from the 1st century AD, considered a real sage and miracle worker back in his day. But the evidence directly linking him as the author of the Kitab Balinas, that's a bit thin.
So it's not a slam dunk.
Not quite. But get this. The Kitab Balinas, it could be really old. Some scholars suggest it was written as early as 650 AD, and it was definitely finished by the time of the Caliphate of Al-Mamun. That puts it somewhere between 813 and 833 AD.
So we're talking really early, possibly even centuries before it surfaces in the West.
Precisely. This puts the Emerald Tablet front and center as a very, very early piece of alchemical writing.
Wow, that pushes the timeline way back. And what about this Balinas guy? Did he write the tablet?
Well, that's the interesting part. The Kitab Balinas doesn't claim that Balinas wrote it. It suggests he discovered it.
He found it, like stumbled upon it.
Picture this. Balinas finds this vault, and inside, a mummified Hermes Trismegistus clutching the tablet. Talk about a discovery. It frames the Emerald Tablet not as something invented by humans, but as this ancient artifact full of timeless wisdom, just waiting to be rediscovered.
That's some Indiana Jones level stuff right there. I mean, it almost feels like those discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi texts, right? Ancient writings hidden away, then rediscovered, offering this glimpse into how people thought way back when.
It adds a whole other layer to the mystery, doesn't it?
For sure. And were there any theories that pointed to even earlier origins for the Emerald Tablet, like even further east?
There have been a few, though they're a bit more speculative. Ruska, for example, considered the possibility of origins in intellectual traditions further east. And Needham even proposed a potential Chinese source. It really underscores how interconnected the ancient world was in terms of ideas.
Right, ideas could travel vast distances even back then.
Absolutely. So, while the exact when and where are still open for debate, most scholars agree. The Emerald Tablet is a very early work of alchemy, possibly even the earliest surviving one.
It's like the bedrock, then, for a lot of alchemical thought that came after.
Exactly, a foundational text. Now let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the emerald in the tablet. Was it really carved on an emerald? I've always pictured this vibrant green, slab.
Yeah, like something straight out of a fantasy movie.
That's a tempting image, but the reality might be less glamorous. You see, the word translated as emerald back then, well, it didn't always refer to the specific gemstone we think of today.
Wait, so it might not have been a real emerald?
In ancient Greek and Egyptian usage, the same word could refer to actual emeralds, but also green granites, or even a green type of jasper. So the material is open to interpretation, really, likely something green and considered precious, but not necessarily the emeralds we're familiar with. And it's definitely a world away from some medieval emerald objects like the Table of the Spanish Gothic Kings or the Sacro Catino, which turned out to be just green glass.
Oh, wow. So the emerald in the title might be more about the color and the idea of preciousness, not the actual mineral.
Precisely. It reminds us that language and the meaning of words can change over time. But enough about the physical tablet. Let's get to the real meat, those core principles that have fascinated people for centuries. It's a short text, but it's packed with meaning. How do we even begin to unpack all of that?
Right. It's not exactly a light read.
The best way is to look at some key translations and pinpoint those recurring themes and also the subtle differences between them. The tablet is often divided into these numbered clauses, which really helps when comparing versions and tracing how people have interpreted it throughout history.
Like a roadmap through the text.
Exactly. So let's start at the very beginning, shall we? What kind of tone does the opening statement usually set?
Yeah, how does it grab the reader's attention?
Well, across different translations, the first statement really hammers home this idea of truth and certainty. Take Jabir's version, for example. He kicks it off with truth, certainty, that in which there is no doubt. Beto's translation goes with true and remote from all cover of falsehood. Even Newton, the famous physicist and alchemist, translated it as "'tis true without lying, certain and most true."
So no messing around, basically. It's saying, listen up, this is the real deal.
Exactly. It asserts itself as the source of absolute, undeniable wisdom, sets a tone of authority right from the start. Now, on to what's arguably the most famous line. You know the one. Clause 2.
Oh yeah, this is the big one, the line everyone quotes.
In its most popular form, Clause 2 says, "That which is above is from that which is below, and that which is below is from that which is above." It's that fundamental Hermetic principle, often summed up as above, so below. It's basically talking about this interconnectedness, this mirroring between different levels of existence.
So like, what happens in the heavens is reflected here on Earth,
Right.
and even within ourselves.
Exactly. Burckhardt interpreted it in terms of the interplay between active and passive forces. Form needs matter to manifest, and spiritual power needs a receptive human soul to take effect. Schumacher pointed out the idea of corresponding planes in creation, that analogy between the macrocosm, the big picture, the universe, and the microcosm, the individual human being. Understanding one can lead to understanding the other.
So if we can understand ourselves, we can understand the entire cosmos.
In a nutshell, yeah. And interestingly, Needham even saw parallels with the yin and yang concept in Chinese philosophy, that interplay of seemingly opposite forces that are actually complementary and interconnected.
So not just a poetic phrase, but a whole philosophy of existence.
Exactly. And for you, dear listener, it means that the Emerald Tablet is not just about obscure alchemical processes. It's about a unified view of reality, where everything is linked, and where understanding ourselves can unlock the secrets of the universe. Now, moving on. What about that concept of one that pops up in the next clause?
Yeah, the origin of everything coming from one. That's a pretty big claim.
It is, and the early Latin translations have some interesting differences here. Some use meditation, suggesting contemplation, while others use mediation, which hints at an intermediary force. Then there's adaptation, the idea of fitting or adjusting, versus adoption as taking on or inheriting.
So different ways of understanding how everything comes from that one.
Exactly. Now, Hortulanus, the commentator, interpreted this one as the prima materia, the primal, undifferentiated matter, that raw material from which all the elements are born. He saw it as a stone arising from a confused mass, pregnant with possibility. Trithemius viewed it as the essential unity that gives rise to a ternary, a threeness that's super important in Hermetic thought. Burckhardt took a more mystical approach, describing this one as the undivided, invisible light of the unconditioned one being refracted into the multiplicity of the cosmos. And Schumacher, he stuck with that idea of undifferentiated primal matter being the source of creation.
So many different takes, but all revolving around this idea of a single unified origin for everything. It's a concept you find across many spiritual traditions, isn't it?
Absolutely. It speaks to a deep human need to understand where we come from and where everything comes from. And then in Clause 4, we meet the sun and the moon, not just as celestial bodies, but as, well, kind of cosmic parents.
The sun is the father, the moon is the mother. Very symbolic, very alchemical.
Oh, absolutely. Redgrove, he interpreted them as representing spirit and matter, going beyond the simple gold and silver symbolism that became popular later on in alchemy. Burckhardt, he saw the sun as nous, the intellect, the active principle, and the moon as psyche, the soul, the receptive principle. Schumacher connected them directly to the prima materia, the sun being the fiery aspect and the moon the watery one, like the essential elements from which everything is born.
It's like the interplay of opposites, the active and the passive that we saw in the as above, so below principle.
Exactly. And Hortulanus even talks about this artificial sun created through the alchemical process. He says it's even more powerful than the natural sun, and it needs the luna of the philosophers as a kind of vessel or receptacle.
Okay, so we've got the celestial parents,
Yeah.
but then we also have the more earthly elements, wind and earth.
Right. Clause 5 brings those in. It says the earth carries it, presumably the primal substance or maybe the product of that sun and moon union in her belly, and the wind nourishes it.
Again, so much symbolism packed into a few words. What do the commentators make of this?
Well, Albertus Magnus, he took wind to refer to the alchemical process of levigatio. It's basically making the material light and airy through evaporation in a device called an alembic, like a type of still.
So a practical interpretation of the wind.
Right. Hortulanus linked wind to life and spirit, that animating force, and earth was the ferment needed for the stone to manifest.
Makes sense. Earth is the fertile ground from which things grow.
Exactly. Then you have Trithemius, who kept it simple, saying the wind carries its seed in her belly. But Mayer, he went into a lot of detail, connecting wind to vapors and sulfur, the volatile principles, and earth was the nurturing nurse, drawing parallels to a mother and child. Burckhardt, he saw wind as that vital breath, the quicksilver that contains the potential for gold, and earth was the inner reality of the body, the fixed aspect. Ibn Umail, in his commentary, focused on the wind as the process of distillation, raising that spiritual water up into the air.
It's amazing how these simple elements can be interpreted on so many different levels, both practical and symbolic. It's like they have multiple layers of meaning.
Exactly. They're not just material elements, but also metaphors for spiritual processes. Then, in Clause 6, we encounter the concept of telesmi, which translates to works of wonder. We might know them better as
Talismans.
You got it. Burckhardt explained that talisman actually comes from telesma, and these talismans work through correspondence, a kind of condensation of spiritual energies onto a subtle plane of existence.
So they're not just trinkets, but objects imbued with real power.
Right. And Burckhardt drew this fascinating parallel between the talisman as a carrier of invisible influence and the alchemical elixir, that transformative ferment that changes base metals into gold.
So both talismans and elixirs are working on this invisible energetic level. Okay, and then we move into the actual transformation process, physically involving earth and fire.
That's clauses 7 and 7a. Hortulanus, he understood turning to earth as the soul of the stone becoming fixed and unified with its nurturing aspect.
So like being grounded.
Yes. Earth acting as a catalyst, or a ferment, in the process. Trithemius just talked about casting the seed upon the earth. Backstrom, he labeled this stage first distillation, coming from a later alchemical tradition. Burckhardt saw it as the embodiment of the spirit, making the volatile fixed. Schumacher focused on the need to fix the prime matter so you can actually work with it.
So many interpretations of that turning to earth, but they all seem to point to this grounding and solidifying of something.
Exactly. And when it comes to the separation in Clause 7a, Hortulanus used the term dissolution. Burckhardt called it extraction of the soul from the body, and Schumacher described it as removing the volatile principle associated with fire or air to achieve stability.
So purifying it by separating out the more volatile parts.
Right. It's interesting to note that some versions of the text have that phrase, its power is complete, as a separate line. It subtly changes how you understand the flow of these clauses.
Ah, the importance of those little details.
Absolutely. Now, after this separation and union, there's an ascent to heaven and then a descent back to earth.
That's Clause 8. Sounds like a journey.
It is. Albertus Magnus interpreted this as specific alchemical operations. Ascent to heaven was calcination heating the material intensely to give it the qualities of fire, and descent to earth was inhumation, reviving what was killed by calcination, giving it the qualities of earth.
So up to the heavens, back to the earth. The cyclical process.
Exactly. Hortulanus linked this to the multiplication of the stone, with the more volatile part ascending through sublimation and then being reintegrated with the fixed part through descension, making the corporeal spiritual and vice versa. Trithemius saw it as the perfected ternary receiving power from both the celestial and the terrestrial realms. Backstrom called it the last digestion and described it as the circulation of the azoth, the universal solvent or life force. Red even thought it might refer to a keratokis, a special alchemical device used for cyclical distillation and sublimation. Burckhardt interpreted it as the dissolution of ordinary consciousness followed by the crystallization of the spirit, and Schumacher just described it as vaporization and reunion.
Wow, so many different ways to understand this process. But that cyclical nature is definitely a common theme.
It speaks to that constant interplay between different states, refinement through repetition.
And what about Clause 9? The acquisition of worldly glory and banishment of obscurity. Those sound like pretty desirable outcomes.
They do. Trithemius linked this to the mind's ability to understand the deepest mysteries once it achieves a purified unity. Backstrom associated it with the transformation of that initial black matter into white and then into the red stone. He believed the red stone had amazing benefits for health, could promote charity, and even elevate mental faculties.
So it's about more than just material transformation.
Absolutely. It's about inner transformation, too. Backstrom also believed that just studying the Philosopher's Stone itself could elevate the mind. Burckhardt saw it as the constant light of the spirit overcoming ignorance and illusion. Schumacher thought the resulting product would be so pure that it would dominate over all less perfected substances.
So, achieving a state of true knowledge and enlightenment. Powerful stuff.
Right. And then we come to Clause 10, which talks about supreme strength and the power of penetration.
Intriguing. And a bit intimidating, to be honest.
Well, Trithemius said that the Philosopher's Stone could conquer every subtle essence and penetrate every solid material. It's imbued with this maximal fortitude.
Unstoppable force.
Right. Backstrom claimed the LP, the lapis philosophorum, or philosopher's stone, has all these natural powers for exaltation and regeneration. It gets stronger with each multiplication, can even penetrate noble metals like gold and silver. So again, we're talking about transformation on the deepest levels.
Like nothing can resist its power.
Exactly. Burckhardt emphasized that alchemical fixation isn't just external, it's an internal process. It refines bodily consciousness, making it subtle and penetrating. He even quoted Jabir on the body becoming spirit and spirit becoming body, resulting in this luminous intermediate substance. Schumacher agreed, saying the product's subtlety allows for deep penetration.
Okay, getting into some pretty heady territory here.
We are, but hang in there, listeners. We're almost through the main clauses.
Okay, good. Now, what about that quick mention of the creation of the world and all the amazing things that come from it?
Clauses 11 and 12? Clause 11 is a really short statement about creative relations that come from this fundamental principle or substance.
So creation is this ongoing process of adaptation and transformation.
Exactly. Burckhardt connected this back to that macrocosm-microcosm idea, suggesting that when humans realize their original divine nature, the little world of the self perfectly reflects the great world of the cosmos.
That's beautiful imagery.
Schumacher viewed alchemy itself as a kind of microcosm of creation, even pointing out what he saw as sexual symbolism in the descriptions of union and generation. And interestingly, Burckhardt noted that the Arabic text adds the phrase, "this way is traversed by the sages," highlighting the practical, experiential aspect of this wisdom.
So it's not just theory. It's a path to be walked.
Okay.
And then we come to Hermes declaring himself Thrice graced with wisdom, Hermes Trismegistus.
Right, that's clause 13.
What's the meaning behind that title?
Well, Hortulanus saw it as an esoteric teaching about the components of the stone, the mineral, vegetable, and animal realms, the interplay of three in one, triple and single, the four natures expressed through three colors. He even used the analogy of a grain of corn containing the potential for a whole plant.
Okay, so a lot packed into that thrice graced title.
Newton thought Hermes, in this context, was symbolizing the mercury of the philosophers, a key alchemical substance. Backstrom said Hermes was represented by a serpent, which is a classic symbol of hidden knowledge and wisdom.
Makes sense. Serpents are often associated with secrets and mysteries.
Burckhardt linked the three aspects of wisdom to the spiritual, psychic, and corporeal levels of reality. And Schumark went with the traditional interpretation. Hermes Trismegistus as the greatest philosopher, priest, and king.
Embodiment of wisdom in all those domains.
Exactly. Oh, and it's worth remembering that some scholars, like Ruska, think sections 3, 12, and 14 might have been added to the original text later on.
Always more layers to uncover. And then, the very end, that brief statement about completing the work.
Clause 14. It's usually just a final remark, often hinting at the successful completion of the solar work, that ultimate goal of alchemical transformation and spiritual realization.
Short and sweet.
It's like it's saying, if you've understood everything that came before, you don't need a lot of words to describe the final achievement.
Wow, what a journey through the core text. It's incredible how much depth and meaning there is in those few lines. But as you mentioned earlier, there's a whole tradition of commentaries and interpretations that add even more layers to the Emerald Tablet, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Emerald Tablet has been a source of inspiration for so many alchemists and thinkers throughout history.
Like a wellspring of ideas.
Exactly. For instance, Hortulanus was really into the idea that the artificial sun created through alchemy is actually more powerful than the natural sun.
Well, more powerful than the sun itself.
Yeah.
That's a bold claim.
It is. Then you have Albertus Magnus, who explored the link between celestial influences and what happens here on Earth. He said celestial powers descend through this intermediary he called Allure, and this connects the properties of metals to the planets.
So connection between the heavens and the earth mediated by Allure.
Allure, yep. And Ibn Umail's commentary is super interesting. He saw water as the fundamental secret, the life force of everything. He interpreted the sun and moon as representing male and female principles, the subtle realm as spiritual water, and the gross realm as the earthly body. And the whole alchemical process was like a spiritual distillation, a breathing in of the divine spirit.
That's beautiful, that image of breathing in the divine spirit.
It really captures that mystical dimension of alchemy. And Trithemius, he drew a line between celestial philosophy, which is all about divine knowledge, and worldly philosophy, which is concerned with the material realm. He saw a progression. Dedicated study leads to profound knowledge, which then blossoms into love, and finally the ability to perform miracles.
From knowledge to love to miracles. I like that progression.
It's pretty inspiring. Then there's Newton, in his alchemical writings, who believed that inferior and superior fixed and volatile substances, those things often associated with sulfur and quicksilver, were actually different expressions of the same underlying reality, just at different stages of maturity. They unite like male and female principles to create something new.
So unity through the reconciliation of opposites.
Yeah.
We're back to that central theme.
We are. And for Newton, the whole of creation mirrored the principles of the alchemical art. Blavatsky, a major figure in theosophy, identified that mysterious thing in the tablet as the universal magical agent, often called astrolight or Azoth. It's that life force permeating the cosmos. Sherwood Taylor saw the spirit of the sun's operation as this unifying force connecting heaven and earth, having the power to perfect and penetrate everything. And even within Sufi traditions, as interpreted by Idris Shah, the Emerald Tablet has been seen as a reflection of the unity between the microcosm and the macrocosm, and the path of inner transformation.
It's incredible how much this short text has resonated with people across such a wide range of philosophical and spiritual traditions, each one finding its own meaning in those verses.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it. Its brevity and symbolic density have allowed for so many different interpretations over the centuries.
So after this deep dive, what are the most important things listeners should take away from our exploration of the Emerald Tablet?
Well, first, its mysterious history. It could be incredibly old, possibly dating back to the very early centuries AD. It's a foundational text in the history of alchemy. Second, that core Hermetic principle of interconnectedness, as above, so below. It suggests this fundamental unity between all levels of existence.
Everything is connected.
Everything. And third, the rich symbolic language it uses, especially those archetypal roles of the sun, moon, wind, and earth, representing fundamental cosmic forces. And finally, the sheer diversity of interpretations it's inspired across the centuries. It shows just how powerful and adaptable its message really is.
It's been a real journey, that's for sure. And for you, our listeners, I'm curious. Considering all these different interpretations, what idea or image from the Emerald Tablet sticks with you the most? What resonates with your understanding of the universe and the possibility of transformation? We encourage you to dig deeper. We've got a bibliography on our website. Go explore the fascinating world of Hermetic texts. Thanks for joining us on our 100th deep dive here in the Occult Archives.